So let's just introduction. I'm Ron Sweet. I've been at UTSA longer than you've been alive. And I started teaching this class pretty early on. I was still at USAA, not on the investment side yet. I was still on the corporate side. And the first semester I taught it very, very traditionally. I taught it as a, textbook, and I even used a textbook, amazingly. It was a horrible textbook. I used the textbook from the previous professor, and it was just a horrible textbook with exams and those kind of things. But as I got into it more, I thought this is a perfect class to do some real life stuff, to do true security analysis. You take a job in security analysis, you don't have exams. There's no such thing. You write papers. That's what you do. You do research and you write papers. So I wanted to turn it into a research class and do an actual report. It means it's a more difficult class. So it's not for the lighthearted. This is really the serious finance major class. I talked to Dr. Maynard about that. Can we really have a class where it's really for those students that are very, very serious about finance, and especially very serious about investments? And a lot of students say it feels like a capstone class, and it probably should feel a little bit like a capstone class. So everything you do in this class, you should have seen before. Now, whether you remember or not, you may not, so I'm not going to assume you've had any of this stuff before, but it should all be material that you've had before: discounted cash flow, discount rates, forecasting, those type of things, SWOT analysis, quarters analysis, all these things you should have seen before. They're all stuff. There's nothing in this class, in these papers, that you wouldn't be assumed to know if you went into an interview. So it's not like I'm giving you some new advanced material. So it's not like that. So this isn't like taking a derivatives class or something like that. So we're going to stick with the stuff employers would expect you to already know, but you're going to apply. So this is very much an application class. And essentially what you'll do in this class, it's what you would do in a regular security analysis job, probably in a week, but we're going to spread it out over the entire semester. So you're going to do a week's worth of work over 3 months. And what we're doing is essentially your initial research report. I don't know if you've ever seen those before. I might show you some. I have a few actually from UTSA alums that have been working in this industry. So it's your initial exposure. Your firm hasn't covered this company before, and you're working on the sell side. And we'll talk about the sell side versus the buy side here a little bit. But you're working on the sell side. You're an analyst. You're doing your initiation report. This is the first time you're writing about this company at your company, and this is what you do, full blown. After you do that initial report, your future reports are much shorter. They're summarized. They're only a few pages, but the initial report. I've got one from one of our alums from about 5-6 years ago. He graduated, got hired by Goldman Sachs. It took a few tries. I kept sending his name to them, and they wouldn't hire him. And I finally emailed, said, "Why aren't you hiring this guy? He's like one of the smartest students I've ever had." And so they finally hired him, and then they were glad they did because he moved up really, really fast. Within 3-4 years, he was the manager of the department with several people and publishing these type of reports. So he sent me a few of his reports, really, really impressive stuff. So it's, this is real life stuff. We're going to try to work it so that you don't feel stressed about it, but the stress is going to be making sure you put time in this class every week. This is not a class for the procrastinator. If you're a procrastinator, this class will be a disaster. And by the way, if you're a procrastinator, security analysis will be a disaster. Security analysis, boy, I was a security analyst at USAA. No one talks to you for weeks. You're all by yourself. It's an extreme, I don't know if y'all like autonomy, but it's an extremely autonomous job. There was no training. No one showed me how to do security analysis. I showed up and they said, "Do your job, Ron." I was like, "Okay, what do I do?" And they say, "Well, you figure that out. That's what you're hired to do. You're supposed to already know what you're supposed to be doing." So I just made up my own stuff based on the classes I'd been in, extremely autonomous. And then I would work 3, 4, 5 weeks, put together a report, go talk to my boss. He or she would say, yeah, I don't like that too much, forget it. And there's 5 weeks of work and nothing. Or he or she would say, yeah, that's really great. Let's put money in that. That makes some sense. The first company I did was actually on the fixed income side. It was a bond. I did all my analysis. It was a utility. I didn't know anything about utilities. The utility portfolio manager was supposed to train me. So his training was he walked over and handed me 3 books. I went back to his desk. That was my entire training on that. I didn't know what a watt was. I had to figure that out. So I finally made a recommendation. We should buy the bond. So I go into the boss's office and say, yeah, this looks pretty good. He says, well, that's good because we bought the bond like 2 weeks ago. So file your report away. So, so that's kind of how you start off with this. You can't procrastinate. You got to be producing stuff because eventually you're on the hook. You got to produce, you got to show what you've done. Now, this is a great job when you're about to retire because you really can do nothing for the last 3 months of your job and no one will know. And then you can just leave the company and they won't say anything. But when you start off, you gotta find some way. And you got to think about this. This is a good test for you yourself. If you're thinking about this industry, can you set aside time every week where you turn everything off, the cell phone, the internet, and you sit down and you're working on a research report and you set it aside so you're organized, you're doing the right kinds of things every week. You don't let a week go by where you're not making progress. You have a plan, you know what you're working on. So that's what this class is about. Each one, so we're doing one paper, but I've broken it up into 9 papers. And each one of these papers, I'm going to give you as much guidance as I can. Some of them are very, very scripted. So some of the papers, Sophia and Aaron, y'all remember that project 1 in 2013 where you did the financial analysis? Hopefully y'all remember that, but your paper 4 looks very much like that. So some of you have had me before, you'll see some papers look very similar. If you took my investment class, the papers 3 and 4 in there where you do the discount rate and the valuation, those papers look very similar to that. But I'm going to give you, some of the papers are in fact, probably most of the papers, you will have a very clear template to follow. On some of the papers, you don't. And unfortunately, the very first paper is the one I have least template on. It's the industry analysis. And every industry is so different. I'll give you ideas. And some students, they can't get off of paper 1. They're just catatonic and that's it. They can't function because paper 1 is a tough paper. So what I recommend on paper 1 is just do it. You may not like it, get it done. I will allow some resubmission of papers. So if you do paper 1, you don't like it and it's terrible, then set it aside. And at the end of the semester, when the papers are much shorter, you can go back and see if you can fix some of it. And you'll know, I'll give you a detailed rubric on what went wrong. And so you can go back and fix it. So don't let paper 1 kill you because once you get past paper 1, they do get more straightforward and get easier. Papers 3 and 4, really 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 9 are really quite straightforward. You can see the due dates in there, so just get the paper done. Some students, some of y'all know I don't count much off for lateness. That's probably a really negative for this class because the last thing you want to do is I got to get it perfect. I got to get it perfect, and then you're late, and now you're behind the curve on the next papers. And then you're behind the curve on the next papers and you just can't catch up. So I recommend get it done. Just go. If you don't like it, submit what you have and get to the next paper. All right. Each paper is worth 11% of the grade. So one paper is not going to kill you. If you get a 60 or 71 paper, you can make it up on the others and you can resubmit. So I will give you templates, follow them. Even like in paper 1, as difficult as it is, we're going to use Porter's analysis as our main framework there. So you do have a framework to follow. If you've never done Porter's analysis before, you can't graduate without doing that. So here's a good chance for you to get some exposure with Porter's. Hopefully you've all done a Porter's analysis. I added a forecast a few years ago. I was really shocked. I asked one class, how many of y'all have never done a forecast in undergraduate? And the majority of the class raised their hands, and that really shocked me. So if you've never done a forecast, we're going to do a forecast and have a template to help you with that. You're going to need a lot of data. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if we're going to be on campus. I don't know what y'all think the chances we're going to be back on campus. I don't see any real break in the COVID numbers. So I don't know. What I'm assuming is we will not be on campus. I'm going to make that assumption. And there's a lot of data you're going to need from Bloomberg, and I'm going to assume you don't have access to Bloomberg. And so what that means is I've got to go up to UTSA and pull data for 50 students off of Bloomberg. So it's going to take me 20 hours to do that. So that's why I need to know your company pretty early on in the semester, because I need to start pulling that data. If you don't make my deadline for telling me your company, then you'll just have to pick one of the companies I have out there on Blackboard, because I'm not going to be going to campus more often if we don't go back to campus. Now, if we go back to campus, no big deal. You can get the data yourself, or you let me get the data. So I will be using Bloomberg. That's if you're not a Bloomberg user, that's bad, because you need to be learning Bloomberg. So if you've never used the Bloomberg machines in the Financial Studies Center, you still want to do that if we can ever get that opened again. But I'm going to assume you don't have access to Bloomberg, and I'll get the data for you.
Professor, question, if I could stop you for a second.
Sure.
What was the date for to choose the company?
I really need it. I really need it Saturday. I'm probably going to spend all day Sunday pulling data. I've got 2 classes that need data from Bloomberg, and so I'll be using Saturday and Sunday. And
so
I don't know when
we should let you know by Friday or Saturday.
Well, I'm not exactly sure when I'm going in, but it'll probably be Sundays. So if I have it Sunday before noon, I'll be okay. I'll email that out this Friday, and you'll know the exact date. But we're going to try to do it tonight. So you need to send me 3 names, because not every company is going to work. There's some companies, because of COVID, that the data is just falling apart. They're just a disaster. And so we'll have to avoid, unless you just want a really, really difficult company. We'll talk about which companies to pick.
Okay, one more question before you move forward, if I may. The project due dates I'm assuming those are the papers, when the projects are the papers that are due?
Right, and I got a typo at the bottom. It's the last ones are 8 and 9. Sorry about that. Not 9 and 10. I used to have 10 papers, that I broke it down to 9. It's not any less work. I just combined 2 of the papers. But yeah, these are the due dates. We don't have a final in this class, so I'll take your papers when you got them, but when grades are due, grades are due. So grades are due that next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. If I don't have your papers by then, you either get an incomplete or whatever. So, they're due when they're due. So the number one lesson with this semester is don't get behind. Now, the really good news is paper 1 is by far the hardest. It's the least scripted, and it's the most difficult. So you've got good news. That's why I say just get paper 1 done. Do the best you can. And don't fret over it. Turn it in. Just turn it in on time. You got about a month to work on it. So you need to start on it really fast, because it is a lot. If you're a little late on paper 1, it's not the end of the world, but I would recommend do your best to get it turned in on time. If you do that, the papers get increasingly easier. So 1's the hardest, 2, 3, and 4 are the next hardest, 5 and 6 are the next, 7, and then 8, 9 are the easiest. So that's kind of the nice thing, is they get easier and easier as they go, especially 8 and 9, especially some students are able to put 8 and 9 together just really, really quickly. I've actually made 8 really, really simple. It's the technical analysis one, which is, I don't want y'all spending, I just want to expose you to that topic. So I'm not asking for much there.
What's the date on 8 and 9? I'm sorry, I can't see because your little screens are there.
It's December 9th, but you'll see it. It's on
okay.
It's the syllabus is out there on Blackboard.
Got it.
All right. So you do have in the syllabus, it describes each paper. So let me just real quickly. Now, how did I come up with this class? So when I took the CFA exam, one of our readings was an actual research report from Merck. I might show it to you one of these days. It's really old now, but so the CFA, the Chartered Financial Analysts, they're the ones who are the industry trade group for all security analysts. So they had this paper. I don't think they asked a single question on the exam from this paper, because I don't know what they would have asked us. But I took that paper and went in detail and say, okay, this is what the CFA says should be in a research report. And I took those items. It came up with 7 of the 9 papers. And so I added 2 papers. I added the forecast and I added the technical analysis. So I added 2 things. I think they probably had a forecast in there, so that maybe not added that much. So I'm using that as the template. I've been watching research reports since then. I've seen a lot of them that don't have all 9 things in them, but I haven't seen anything that added something new. So it's not like I'm leaving anything out. So I do look at these reports, and I'll show you some example reports. So the hardest part is paper 1, which is the industry analysis and the macroeconomic analysis. I used to break those out into 2 papers. So we're going to be talking a lot about that first paper here starting Thursday night. So you can start getting ready. I'm curious how many of y'all have done a Porter analysis. Say yes if you have, or just
Yes.
yes.
Yes, not for a class, but yes.
How many of y'all have never done a Porter's analysis?
I don't even know what that means.
You've
I
never
feel
heard
like
it
I
before.
have, but I don't
Same.
remember doing it.
Never.
You
Never.
probably saw it like in a management class or a strategy class. Sometimes it's covered in capstone.
I just did one for my capstone last semester too. My summer semester, I just did one.
Yeah, I'm going to require you use Porters for this first paper. I'm going to show you why. First of all, it's very common in finance. It is definitely. I remember we used to interview 400 or 500 firms a year in one of my jobs, and there was one portfolio manager, and their process, it was Porters, but she never said Porters, and she talked about it as if they had created it, and I was like, no, you didn't come up with that. But she might have joined the firm and thought their firm came up with it, and she was presenting it as their idea. It's like, no, this is Porters. I didn't say anything to her, but you will see Porters quite a bit. And so I'm going to walk you through it, so don't worry. I'm going to talk about Porters, both the 5 forces and the generic strategies. I want you to use both of them. The generic strategies work more for paper 2, but they can work for paper 1. We're also going to talk about economic moats, which is has overlap with Porters. I don't know how many of y'all done economic moats before, but that's more of a paper 2. So there will be some overlap, and I'll give you some hints. I mean, a good hint. When you're doing the industry analysis, I recommend you do something as simple as go find the SWOT analysis on MarketLine for your company, and the O and the T will give you ideas for your industry analysis. So I'm going to give you some hints like that, or things you can do to give you some really great ideas about your company, your industry, and your company. All right. Very, very important. You need to start working on paper 1 as soon as possible. You should have started on like 6 months ago. So you're already 6 months behind. Not to stress you out, but no, you want to start on as soon as possible. It is a tough paper. The key with paper 1, and some students just ignore this, and boy, they lose a lot of points. Paper 1, you do not want to talk about your company unless your company is just a market leader. So like Walmart's off the charts because I use Walmart in my example company. So if you're talking about retail, then yeah, you'll talk about Amazon and Walmart because they're so big and so central to it. But you're only talking about your company if it's a major player in your industry. But if your company's not a major player, there's a good chance you won't mention your company once in paper 1. Okay, paper 1 is an industry analysis. We'll talk a lot about, so we'll get into this on Thursday and next Tuesday quite a bit. Then you get into paper 2, and paper 2 is your company overview. What products does it sell? Who are the management? What are their strategies? And there's several things there we can talk about. I sent y'all an email this summer talking about business breakdowns. I don't know if y'all have seen that, or if any of y'all started listening to those. If you're really nervous about this class, I'd recommend you pick a company that has a good business breakdown. They have one on Visa, which Visa's a really good company to do. They have one on Chipotle. Chipotle's a good company to do. I just did one here recently. They have the Smile Club and they have Invisalign, those dental companies. And I don't know if those are good companies to do because they're pretty new and young companies, but very different strategies, but selling the exact same thing. It's really interesting listening to the 2 of those together. Now they have companies that aren't publicly traded, like Cinnabon. I thought the Cinnabon one was really, really good, but it's not a public company. But if you're really nervous about this class, that is an excellent, excellent podcast. You get an hour, and really what you're after here pretty early in the semester is you want to focus on the key issues. There's so much data out there. And some students, that's kind of, the Microsoft paper I have out there as an example. That's a great paper. I think the problem with that paper is he tried to cover every single thing he could cover. And it just got to be too much of a paper. I forget how many pages it is, but it's massive. And Sanjeev, that's kind of the issue with Disney, is you can really get carried away with Disney because they do so many things. So you have to try to limit yourself down because you just have a limit of time. So if you can find, let's say if a company has 10 products, but 3 of them are 90% of their business, you can almost ignore the other 10%. Maybe just mention them in paper 2, but you focus your attention on that 90%, all right? So papers 1 and 2 are challenging, and then it gets a lot more straightforward. So paper 3, Sophia, Aaron, I forget who else is in this class from my 3013 class. You've essentially done this paper, but you did it in that class. The same template. I've changed the template a little bit. I'm always hopefully, Sophia, not to put you on the spot, hopefully that looks familiar. Liquidity,
Yeah,
solvency.
it does. I remember it was the paper we had to write in class, though. It wasn't go home and write it. Yeah.
Yeah, how stressful can that be? That was pretty stressful stuff. But so you know this stuff already. So we'll do that pretty straightforward stuff. And here, so paper 3, you will have, not only will you have a template, but you have to follow it. You have no choice. All right. I had one lady take this class. She didn't follow the template, so she got a really low score. I told her she could redo it. Instead of redoing it, she went to the head of department and tried to get me fired. She was so angry. So I'm telling you now, follow my template. All right. That's one class, one paper. You have no choice. Why do I say that? Well, because I've learned undergraduate finance students are real sloppy with financial analysis. It's all over the board. It's a mess. It's impossible for me to grade. So you follow you can add other things to the template, but you've got to do everything in the template. And I'll talk about some other things that you can add. All right. So that's probably good news for you, right? You want it as clear cut as possible. The forecasts, if you've never done a forecast, I'm going to walk you through it. I'm hoping this semester to teach a forecasting class for the Investment Society. I'm not sure which company I'm going to do next I might do Costco. There's actually a Bond, you were talking about doing Costco. There's actually a business breakdown on Costco. I thought it was really interesting. The one thing I didn't like about business breakdown is they spent almost no time talking about online sales, which I thought was interesting. But Costco is a good company to do forecasting. So if you've never done a forecast, I'm going to show you in class, but you could certainly sit in on the Investment Society on that class. I'm hoping to do everything online and record it. So if you can't sit in, you can listen to the recordings afterwards. I'm not saying that you need to learn how to do a forecast so you can get the paper for this class. I'm saying you need to learn how to do a forecast because that's what we do in finance. So you don't want to graduate without that skill because it's pretty central to what we do. The revenue forecast is the most important, and I'll give you some ideas. There's really 3 approaches students use on the forecast, and it depends on your company. And I'll show you the different approaches, and I'll help you with each one. And I don't know how many of y'all have used Capital IQ, but Capital IQ is a really good resource to use for the forecast. And I'll walk you through that. I do have a template you can use to do your forecast if you like. It's really simplified, but it does work for most companies. Papers 5 and 6, if you took my investment class, you did that when you did papers 3 and 4. So you've already seen that before. If you haven't taken my class, then this is a straightforward paper, very definitive pieces. And this is stuff you should just know. How do you come up with a discount rate with a stock? How do you value stocks? And so that's straightforward. Paper 7 is the relative value side. On this paper, I'm actually going to require you to do certain things. Hopefully we'll be back on campus because this is something I really want you to do yourself on the Bloomberg Lab. And they have videos that show you how to do it. So you can just go to the Bloomberg Lab, get an account, and just follow the videos, and it walks you through step by step how to do it. But if we're not back on campus, I'll have to do all this for you. Last semester, boy, or last year, it took me forever to do that. That's a lot of workload for me. But if we have to do it, we have to do it. So we'll just have to figure that out. But if you have never done a relative value analysis, we're going to do all the pieces, and then we're going to do a target PE approach because that is the most common approach. It's not normally taught in colleges, but I'm going to teach it because it's a pretty common approach in practice. So that one has a fairly strict template, and there's a chance if we're not back on campus, I'm going to be doing half the work for you anyway. So, you know. Now don't say, I got a really bad score on paper 7, professor, you did have to work, so maybe it's your fault, but I'm not going to buy that argument. Paper 8's the easiest, it's technical analysis. I'm looking for much. I'll give you 3 or 4 things you can do. If we're back on campus, Bloomberg has an excellent technical analysis template. And so I hopefully we can do some of that. If not, I'll show you what we'll do in class. And then paper 9 is the executive summary. The key on executive summary is to get everything in one page and then make it look as professional as you can. And I'll give you some examples. You want this to look as much as possible like a sell-side research report. All right, so some of y'all, I don't know how many of y'all notice sell side versus the buy side. So the sell side, it's part of the investment banking world. The sell side, you go work for JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley. On the sell side, you're doing research and you're selling that research to your customers. You're not allowed to buy stocks. That's kind of the downside of the sell side, because you're doing research, you've got to stay impartial. So you can't be doing a sell side, a research report on Costco, and you got 50% of your portfolio on Costco. And so you're saying Costco's the greatest thing in the world because you want the stock price to go up. So you have to be as independent as you possibly can. You can hardly even trade your own portfolio because you're just blocked out. A lot of students don't like the sell side because they are so restricted in what they can do. It's also the glossy, the fancy part of research reports, and we want to make your paper look as fancy as possible so it looks really good on LinkedIn. So be thinking about it as you're writing your paper, you want it to look as professional as possible, and I'll show you some examples of that. You have plenty of examples out there of that. The buy side is where I worked, where you're working for a firm that's actually buying stocks, investing portfolios. And there you're doing research, and they're usually not as pretty of reports. I've interviewed a lot of buy-side analysts for jobs, and they'll show me their research, and it's just they're handwritten and got scratch marks, and it's just, it's real sloppy. It's not all that well published. You do have to write it up. When I was an analyst, if we bought a stock, I had to put my research report in the file, because if the SEC came in and audited us, we had to prove that there was research to back up that trade. So it had to be there. Sometimes I finished my report after we bought the stock, but I still had to put it in the files. And if it wasn't there, the SEC, they did an audit and they say, okay, why did you buy this stock without any kind of supporting research? So think of yourself, if you're on the sell side, you want it glossy, you want it fancy. The sell side is, for most people, you go to the sell side to get it on your resume, and then after 2 or 3 years, you hope the buy side hires you away and you don't have to work till 9 p.m. every night. The sell side is long hours, and it's not long hours because you have a whole lot to do. It's long hours because stuff shows up at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. and you have to write your report before 6 a.m. the next morning. So a lot of it is sitting around and waiting for stuff to arrive, and then you got to write your report and get it out. So if you're on the buy side, you don't necessarily have to do that. You can wait till the next day. Although most buy side people, if their stock's reporting, they're going to sit there all day, all evening until that report comes out. All right. So y'all see the buy side, sell side. I'll show you some examples of the sell side. I can't really show you examples of the buy side because those are proprietary internal reports. All right. So that's the 9 papers you're going to have spread throughout the semester. It goes from hardest to easiest. So that's the good news. So if you're going to be late on a paper 1, maybe say you could, if you getting a little bit behind, but try your hardest not to get behind. Set aside several hours every week and have a plan, know what you're going to work on, and get it done. And if you find in this class, it's just not working for you, you just don't have that type of discipline, then maybe it's a good indication this isn't the career for you. That doesn't mean finance isn't the career for you. There are finance jobs that aren't like this. But this is probably one, if not the most autonomous jobs out there. Right, I started my career in accounting, and every minute of every day, I knew exactly what to do. There was no uncertainty. And then I went to my first finance job, and they were like, I was like, what do I do? And they say, well, what does your job description say? And it said, make the company better. They say, well, then do that. I go, okay, that's kind of nebulous, but so finance becomes much more nebulous than accounting, but you gotta have that discipline to do it. But that job was very project oriented, so that kept me going. But when I became a security analyst, boy, it was like no one ever talked to me. I was all on my own. So test yourself and see. So I'm not trying to discourage you from going in this career if you can't handle this class, because world's a little different now. It is a little different, right? When you have a job, you have to show up 40 hours, 50 hours a week. That does change the discipline. So you have to try to emulate that in this class some way. And I would actually recommend for this class that you set aside the same time every week for this class. So it kind of feels like a job a little bit. I'm not saying you have to do that, but if I were in your place, I would say, okay, 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock on Tuesdays and Thursdays, that's when I'm going to work on my security analysis class. And so something like that. All right, questions. This is the class right here. Y'all see it? That's everything we're going to do. And it's, I'm going to help you along the way. I'm going to give you guidance all the way through, every paper you'll have guidance. It won't be completely just make stuff up from scratch. Make sure you have the components. So look at this. You have to have a Porter's framework. You can't say, well, Porter's is nice, but I want to use this other thing. So, use the things that I'm requiring. Part of that's for me. I've got 50 students, and I got to grade these papers, and it's hard for me to do it if everybody's doing their own things. So that's part of it's, just kind of, but I also think these are really good frameworks. In fact, I can just tell you, if you have a new job and you have a boss that says, do a financial analysis of this company, and you did exactly what we did in this class, they would be very impressed. And I'm actually going to prove that to you here in a second. All right. So questions at that up to there. Probably we'll see how many people drop after this first class. I'd encourage you to stick with it. If you can handle this class, you're going to do well in finance. You will do well. This is the class. This is not for the average student. It's not an impossible class. A lot of students have done extremely well in this class without any trouble, but it is more challenging than most other classes. It will definitely test your ability to organize. It's also a lot of writing, and so finance is writing. We do a lot of writing in finance, no question. My whole career at USAA, boy, I was just writing all along the way. All right, I don't see any questions. I don't see anything on the chat. So
I actually have a question. You might have already touched base on this, but are these papers, do they all have the same, like a requirement length by words or pages or?
Oh, I never give a length requirement. So you can start to gauge that by looking at the student examples. A longer paper is not better than a shorter paper. So, that doesn't matter. The key is that you follow everything in the list. And that's why I was talking to Sanjeev, if you're doing Disney, you may have an extra 5 or 6 pages on paper 2 because it's a more complicated company than if you're doing Costco. So it kind of depends on your company. Some company, and we're going to talk about that. Some companies are going to be more difficult than others.
Understood. Thank you.
And on the job, your boss won't tell you how many pages, so you just have to go for it. Now, I was talking earlier. I will be using, the plagiarism check, and it can be challenging in this class because some students like to keep it together as one big paper. So they do paper 1, and then they add paper 2, and it's all in one file. So that means when you submit it, it's going to look like you have plagiarism because it's going to be checking your paper 2 against your paper when your paper 1's sitting there, right? Well, I can handle that because the software tells me, and it's all the plagiarism is your paper one all over again. So I can see, oh, Sophia is copying Sophia. That's okay. So you can do that. Some of you, if you've had my investment class, it might still plagiarism for papers 5 and 6 because you're using the thing, you're using your Word document from that class. If it shows that you're copying yourself, you can plagiarize yourself. All right. So I would recommend you keep it as one paper and just keep adding to it so you don't have formatting issues and those kind of things. All right. So I highly recommend that. However, take note of this. This is really, really critical. Think about formatting when you first start out. All right. I'm going to show you the formatting now because I do want you to be really aware of this. I'm going to show you my favorite paper is the Coca-Cola paper. I like this paper first because of the story behind it.
54 pages.
Well, you divide that by 9. So yeah, you're writing that over an entire semester. All right, so the student who wrote this, his name's Ryan. He might talk to our class this semester, we'll see. He was working for JP Morgan in a call center in San Antonio. And he wanted to be a security analyst. And his boss says, no way, there's no way I can get to New York. And he went to his boss and he begged him. He says, you know, anyone in New York, all I want is a chance. He kept begging his boss, and his boss finally said, all right, I'll give you a chance, but that's it. So New York called him and said, okay, you have 1 weekend. Give us an analyst report on Coca-Cola. And he put together, not this paper, this is before this paper, he put together a paper on Coca-Cola. He emailed it to me, asking for my feedback, and I was blown away. It was, I mean, given that he did it in like 2 days, I was blown away. It was massively impressive. And I gave him a few pointers, but not much. He had it down. He knew what he's doing. He wanted his job. And when you want the job, you put 24 hours in straight and you do it. They hired him the second they saw it. And he started out on the sell side for JP Morgan. Actually got his name on several JP Morgan reports. He told me, he said, Professor, I'm going to stay on the sales side for 3 years. I don't want to be one of those people who just jump ship. And then 6 months later, he asked me to be a reference for a job on the buy side. So he moved to the buy side after about a year. He's now doing great. He wants to be heavily involved with UTSA and with the investment society. He was born to be a security analyst. And so that's why I like his paper. He made it look as much as he could, the exec summary, as much as he could like a sell side report. And I'll give you some examples. There is his name right there, Ryan Himmelberg. Sharp student. He's doing incredibly well. He was just made for this. So there's his table of contents. You can see that follows very much our paper. Very similar. Now, so here's what I recommend. I prefer the 2-column approach. I think it just looks a lot more professional. What I don't like about what he did here is he has this border. I would, you can do the border. It does look really professional. I actually think you're better off if you keep the margins as narrow as you possibly can, like a 1/2 inch margin. It just gives you a lot more working space, all right? So I would use 2 columns, very narrow margins on the left and the right. Full justify, you also know what full justify is. Just makes it work. Things just fit together a whole lot better. Your charts will look a lot better if you have wider margins. We'll talk about a lot of titles, very short paragraphs. But the 2 columns, you really don't want paragraphs greater than 10 lines. You want to keep it short. We'll talk about the charts. You want really crisp charts. See, this says chart 1. I don't see that he did that, but the way I would like to have it. But if you have a chart 1, you want to have the words chart 1 bolded somewhere in your.
Oh, it has it in the corner of the little picture.
Well, there, but he needs another place.
Oh, gotcha.
So what you don't want is to say chart 1, and your boss says, wow, chart 1's really interesting. What did he say about that? And then she doesn't know where he talked about chart 1. All right. So you want to have chart 1 bolded. You can add other charts. So someone will say, wow, 50 something pages, but you're going to have a lot of charts. So the charts are going to take a lot of your pages. We'll talk about this value chain. I'm a big fan of value chains. I'm going to talk some about that. Well organized, good charts, good use of charts throughout. There's this Porter analysis. We'll talk more about that. You can use quotes in your paper. If you have a long quote, like you're going to quote management, it's more than 2 or 3 lines, separate it as its own paragraph, center it and italicize it, make it look as professional as you possibly can. All right. So that's the key. What if this was your paper and you had it out there on LinkedIn and this was the first thing human resources saw? What do you think their first impression of you would be? You think they're interested in you? This is pretty impressive, isn't it? It's a really high quality paper.
We got to pay this guy a lot of money.
I'm sorry, Sanjeev?
They're probably thinking we got to pay this guy a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to show you some stories of previous students and how. Now, his paper got him the job, but it was the paper he wrote before the class. So the class was kind of easy for him because he'd kind of already written his paper. But real impressive stuff. He's very good at that. I have several, and I would say, out there on Blackboard, I have, I don't know how many papers, 20 student papers. Set it as your goal that your paper becomes one of those example papers next year. All right, make that your goal. So it's an impressive paper all the way through. It's not one of the longer papers. So he averaged about 5 pages a paper. That's not too much. The first paper is by far the longest, no question. And so it's, it's good. 20 pages just in the first one. So we'll talk about this. He did a little different here. I'm combining the macro with the paper one. I'm going to show you how I prefer to do it. I don't like the way I did it in these prior classes. I think there's a better way of doing it. All right. So if you go out on Blackboard, you will see, oops, sorry. Go out on Blackboard under content. You will see rubrics and student examples. Some of these papers are better than others, but all of them, and some of them have something that is really impressive. So like the Chipotle paper, Matthew wrote that paper probably a decade ago, so it's really out of date. And Chipotle is a great company. You got one of those business breakdowns, very interesting. It's a very interesting concept right now. And if you listen to that paper, to that breakdown, they're talking about turnover and margin. Chipotle is increasing their turnover by using things like GrabHub. What is it called? I can't remember. GrubHub, DoorDash. That's great. That's increasing their turnover, but it's reducing their margins because they're having to pay these companies to deliver their food. It also means that the customer's interface is with a non-employee of Chipotle. What does that mean? So there's some really interesting concepts. He didn't talk about that in this paper because that was before all of that. He does an excellent job in his paper of defining the industry of quick serve versus fast food versus sit down. He did a really good job of defining that. I really like it. I like the general dynamics, the first one. That's Andre's paper. One of the first times I taught this class like this. So this paper is going to look a lot different than ours because it was so long ago. But boy, he did a great job of dividing his company into 2 industries. He had the aerospace and he had defense spending. And then you get to the defense side, boy, his talking about the US government versus Saudi Arabia versus China and what the budgets were and who's spending what and what. He did an excellent job of researching that. It's probably terribly out of date now, but you'll see that. So each company has their own thing. Microsoft, boy, that's a crazy paper. I don't know who was complaining about the 50 something pages, but what is this one? Boy, 134 pages. Excellent paper, but boy, his index is 4 pages, 3 pages. Excellent paper. Why is it so long? Well, he decided to talk about everything. Microsoft does a lot of stuff, whether it's, Windows or gaming or whatever, cloud. They do all this stuff, and each one of those is so different. Amazon's a very complicated firm. We all think about Amazon as retail, but what does Amazon make all their money? AWS, right? Yeah, AWS is the bulk of their business. That's a very complicated business to talk about. All right, so I'll give you all these examples. So, use those to help you decide. So your biggest decision is in the next few days is what company you're going to do. That's going to decide everything for this semester. So there's two approaches. One approach is, you know what, I'm only taking 12 hours. I'm not working. This class could get me a job. You know what, I'm going to jump in the deep end. I'm going to do a more difficult company and I'm just going to get into it. So that's one approach. Another approach is, I've never had this professor before. He seems a little strange to me, a little weird. It sounds like a hard class. I'm going to pick an easier company and just learn the process. I'm going to focus on the process and not on the company. So that would be a Costco or a McDonald's or a Nike, something like that. All right. So, that's the kind of, Sanjeev, you do Disney, you're kind of in that more difficult company. If you do a pharmaceutical, you're in a more difficult company. So some companies are easier than others. If you want to, my office hours are whatever, but I'm on a bike every morning for 3 to 4 hours. You can call me anytime in the morning. I'm always on a bike around 8 o'clock. I try to get on the bike by 7, but I'm there by 8. And I'm usually there still by 11. You can call me. So call me, talk about companies. Mauricio is talking about United. I'm not sure United's going to work after COVID-19. I need to look at the data. Usually Southwest Air or Spirit will work better. United might work, but it might be a disaster, Mauricio. When you lose 80% of your revenue in 1 year, that's kind of scary. And I haven't looked at their numbers, but it might be impossible. It's probably doable, but some of the papers like paper 3 might be really, really difficult to do. Twitch, we'll just have to look at it. It's such a young company. Valero should work. Valero's a little difficult, but it would definitely work. You got a lot of really meaty stuff to talk about, like electronic vehicles, right? You might spend 3 pages just on electronic vehicles. You might spend a page on liquefied natural gas. Home Depot works. The problem with Home Depot is their net worth went negative for some reason because of their stock buybacks. So you have a little bit of trouble with paper 3. Starbucks works fine. Airbnb, what are B2C? Oh, B2C, B2B. So business to consumer is usually easier than business to business, but it just depends. There are some really good business to business that are great companies to do. So Packer, I don't know if y'all familiar with Packer, PCAR. That's the business to business. That's a wonderful firm to do. I really like them. Ecolab, I'm a big fan of Ecolab. That's a business to business. I think that's a really fascinating company. That's a good one to do. So there's a lot of business to business that I think are really intriguing because we don't know much about them. I don't know much about Twitch, but it may be too young. Target would work fine.
I got a question about, if I may, you mentioned like Nike would be a relatively easy company to do. How is that? How does that work if they make? I mean, I guess they're like all apparel. Is that what makes it easier? Is it because they're like targeting a particular market, or what makes a company easier or more difficult or more challenging?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Let me jump to the notes. Someone was asking about Newmont. I think Newmont will work. My challenge with Newmont, with what's going on with South Africa, we'll have to just look. South Africa is going through an amazing crisis right now. I don't think AMD works, Jacob. I don't know what's going on with them. They've got some really wacky numbers. So I think you're better off with Intel, or Texas Instruments works really well. NVIDIA definitely works. And I think, Devin, you might have sent them to me. I think NVIDIA works well. I do know one student did NVIDIA a few years ago, and NVIDIA dropped like 40% during the semester. And he's like, Professor, what do I do? I'm not familiar with SC and Melly. I had to look those up. Henry, Carnival Cruise is the same issue as United Airlines. Eduardo, we'll talk about BlackRock here a little bit. I don't know enough about some. Okay, let me get to the class notes, all right? Because y'all gonna overwhelm me here with these company names. All right, so let me give you a little bit before we get into companies. Here's some quotes from previous students. You can just read these, just what they've done with this class. I've had some amazing stories. People getting jobs because of this class and what they did in this class. So yeah, this one was actually a student of mine. She applied for a job she didn't have the experience for. So she emailed me and asked, should she apply for it? I said, sure. I emailed the department and said, you got to interview this lady. She's really strong, really, really good. I know she doesn't have the 2 years. And so she got the interview and she emailed me, what I do, professor, what I do. I said, show them your paper from this class. And she showed them the paper and they hired her on the spot because it was such an exceptional paper. In fact, I think her paper is out there. I think it's one of the example papers. I can't remember which one it is, but just exceptional. So they hired her and she got a job she only had 3 months of experience and they hired her for a job. So if you put the time into it, you've got to get something on LinkedIn that shows your work, what you're capable of. If you haven't been doing that, if you've had me in other classes, you've got a lot of papers from those classes, but this is like the ultimate paper that shows what you're capable of. And it gives you a huge advantage. Most schools today don't do this anymore because professors hate grading. Did I lose y'all?
No,
We're
you
still
just
here.
stopped sharing screen.
No.
That's all.
Can y'all see my screen?
No.
No.
No, oh, sorry. Boy, y'all should step in more quickly here. I thought it was. Okay, sorry. So you can read these quotes in the class notes. So company to pick. All right. So Eduardo, you're talking about BlackRock. BlackRock is on the cusp, but I would recommend not. You should avoid banks, insurance companies, and investment firms, and mainly because they're really different animals. I had one student, Jordan, did a bank. I said, I really recommend that you don't. And he said, professor, I really want to do a bank. About 2 months into the class, or about a month into class, professor, I really wish I hadn't picked a bank. It is very, very, very difficult. So Eduardo, BlackRock's investment firms are not as bad as banks and insurance companies, but they're challenging. They're really challenging. So, I mean, if you want to do it, I'll let you do it, but I'm just going to warn you, there's some papers like 3 and 4 that are going to be extremely difficult. I would recommend against a non-US company without checking with me first. There are a couple of non-US firms out there. You just gotta be real careful that the data is available. You don't always get the same amount of data. If you have a firm that's recently gone through a major M&A, you can do them, but it can be a little bit of a challenge. The stress companies, and that's why I mentioned COVID, you definitely don't want to do a Sears or a firm like a JC Penney. I don't think I would want to do JC Penney right now. So I would avoid those, but even United Airlines, Carnival, those are companies that, boy, it's, there's times where you just almost pass out when you see an article that a firm lost 80% of their revenue in 1 year. I don't know if I've ever read that headline and the company wasn't out of business. So you've got a tough time. Last year, it wasn't so bad because all our numbers were pre-COVID. So we just pretended COVID didn't happen. And students like, what do we do, professor? What? And I was like, yeah, do your best. It's just tough. So now we're post-COVID, and so it's just going to be in the numbers. A firm like Apple, NVIDIA, Costco, firms that actually did well under COVID, yeah, they're going to be fine. So more years is better than fewer years. Sorry, my cat is meowing at me. More years is better than fewer years. So that's a firm like Twilio. Y'all familiar with Twilio? Great company, really interesting, but doesn't have much history. I was talking about those retainer companies or those braces companies, those clear. They're really interesting. It's a really interesting market. I think they're going to completely disrupt the dental business, but they just haven't been around very long. So I think it's a little tough. No conglomerates. GE, Berkshire Hathaway, I would avoid them. Firms that are quasi conglomerates, like a Disney, like a Amazon, like a Microsoft, you can do them, but just be aware, you're talking 3 or 4 industries. in one company. And boy, it can be tough. More peers is better than others. All right, so this is back to, I forgot who was, I guess, Javier, you were asking about Nike. So let me talk about the Nike issue. So Nike is actually not too bad once you get the paper 2. Paper 1 is a little tough. So is Nike apparel? Is Nike sports apparel? Is Nike shoes? Is Nike sports shoes? Is Nike competing with Lululemon? Do y'all consider Nike and Lululemon competitors? Now, what about Nike and Adidas? That's pretty obvious. That's a competitor. But Lululemon, do you have people going out there and say, well, I need to buy some stuff. Do I go to Nike or do I go to Lululemon? Probably not. But they're doing very similar things. So it can be tough. So in that first paper, what you've got to do is define that industry. So that's why I mentioned Matthew's paper on Chipotle. He spent a lot of time making it really clear what restaurants he was talking about. Who are the competitors for Chipotle? So is it McDonald's? Yeah. Is it Jack in the Box? Yes. Is it Olive Garden? No, that's not a competitor. Is it Ruth Chris? Definitely not. So he did a good job. So after it's possible, you just got to spend a little extra time defining, and I'll let you use any definition. If you want a really big definition of apparel, I don't think it works well in paper 1, but you can. But I would probably limit it down. So here's the key. Your definition of the industry can change through the papers. So I tend to, on paper 1, use the most restrictive definition possible. So I would probably, with paper 1, it would be Nike, Adidas, Puma. I can't remember some of the others, but just sports shoes would be my main focus there. But when I get to papers 3, I might open it up to all apparel companies to have a larger industry to be looking, because Lululemon may not be like Nike as far as their customer base, but when it comes to margins, gross margins, net margins, asset turnover, those kind of things, they're very similar. And so it works really well. Does that make sense? So there's going to be a little bit of ambiguity there, but they don't have to be consistent all the way through.
Yeah, I guess I was just, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going with Nike because they're kind of like you're saying, they're kind of all over the place. Like, what market are they really in? Because one of the companies I was kind of intrigued by was Genesis, but Genesis is a part of like Hyundai Motors. With Genesis is only Genesis, right? Where Hyundai has like a fleet of all kinds of vehicles. Where Genesis, they only have like 2 vehicles. They have an SUV and then they have a sedan car. There's only 2 vehicles.
Well, you're stuck with the ticker. So whatever the ticker is, that's your company. So you have, if the ticker is AAPL, you got to cover every single thing Apple does. If it's Microsoft, if that's the ticker, you've got to do everything Microsoft does. So for Amazon, you have to do Amazon, the retail giant, and you got to do AWS. You don't have any choice. So it's at the ticker level, whatever they trade, their stock trades at. That's what you got to be. Now I know there's some companies out there that have subsidiaries that are both a subsidiary and trade. So if you're looking at I can't remember the name of the company. I'm sorry, I have these mental blocks while I'm. So there are some companies that are like that, but that's pretty rare. All right, so the most difficult industries I've found, I probably should add pharma under here, but the most difficult are telecom, utilities, and energy. And I would add pharmaceuticals in there as well. I will say Madeira is a really interesting company to do right now. And I'm not sure they're that difficult. This mRNA to me is really fascinating and very interesting. It's difficult because it's very technical, right? Very biology and very technical. So if you didn't do well in biology, I might not do that one. But but a firm like Merck or Lilly, they do so much. It gets really common. You have a pharmaceutical that has 10, 20, 30 major drugs. Each one of those drugs is a research report on its own. It's really, really tough. Telecom utilities are tough just because those are very, very complicated industries. Energy is tough. There's some that are better than others. So Valero is definitely, sorry, my cat is a major pain right now. Valero is not as difficult because they're more one product than an Exxon. Exxon would be really difficult because Exxon does everything Valero does plus everything else. So the other problem with energy is they love these master partnerships, and boy, those are a mess to have to deal with. So energy can be tough. Some are easier than others, though. So there are some opportunities there. Interesting industries, the business to business, manufacturing, medical equipment, like a Medtronic is really interesting. The tech sectors work really, really well. Metals, so Newport, those are interesting companies. Chemicals are interesting. That's why Ecolabs, I think, is really interesting. The easiest industries are restaurants, clothing, retail outlets. Those things you're already familiar with. If you can describe the business without having to go out and do research. I can tell you what Chipotle does without having to go do any research. That's pretty straightforward to me. So those are the easier ones. Now I gave you the Russell. Let me check the chat real quick. Someone asked about PayPal. PayPal might work. Now I said no financials. Financials are banks, investment firms. I don't consider PayPal and Visa and MasterCard to be financials. A financial is a spread business. They have loans and they have deposits or some such, they have a spread. So they're making money. They have customers on the asset side, they're making money for loan. They have customers on the liability side and they're making a spread. So they're charging 6% on auto loans and paying 3% on their CDs. So that's not PayPal, that's not Visa, that's not MasterCard. So those businesses can well work. Now, the issue with PayPal might be just the data doesn't look very good. I hate PayPal because I think they grossly overcharge for everything. It makes my charity uses PayPal, and I hate having to pay $5 just to receive a $100 donation. And I do think PayPal might be radically disrupted, so it could be interesting. I was reading boy, y'all getting me off these tangents that I really love, but one of the podcasts on that business breakdown, they're saying we may see a move back to company-specific credit cards. That Walmart might have a credit card so that anytime you shop on Walmart, they'll give you a 2% discount so that they don't have to pay Visa, MasterCard, or Bank of America. And you won't care because it's actually set up on your phone that when you walk into Walmart, it automatically uses that card. Walmart loves it, right? Because instead of paying Bank of America 2%, they pay you 2%. So that could be a disaster for a PayPal type of firm. It could be a disaster for some of these. So to me, it's interesting. There's a lot to talk about, but we got to look at the data. Put it on your list, Javier, and I'll go look at the numbers and I'll let you know if there's any major issues with it. I do think it's almost all of these firms, I don't think there's a firm out there where there's not something major interesting going on right now. So I gave you the Russell 3000 file. It's out there on Blackboard. So I organized it by industry, column C, but you can resort it by column D or column E. I wouldn't go by sector unless you're going to do telecom or something. But and then I sorted it by company size. I don't know if anybody would want to do Omnicorp. That's a bizarre company. I thought one student was interested in doing it, and it's a marketing company. You would think a marketing company, you go to their website, you just be blown away, and they had like the worst website I've ever seen. Like, how can you have a bad website in your marketing company? Boeing's a really great company to do, but their net worth went negative. And so it messes up paper 3. So Lockheed or Northrop might be a better one to do. And a firm like General Dynamics, it's a great company to do, but they do both defense and aerospace. Well, so does Boeing, so these others. But like a Raytheon or a Lockheed, they're almost entirely defense, so it makes it a little easier. You kick out an entire industry by doing that. So what I did over on the side is I put some ones by companies that I know have worked well in the past. I'm not saying they'll work well now. I need to look at the numbers, especially after COVID. But you just look down and you'll see. So you might freeze the frames and just go down the ones and just see what's there. So Deere works well. ADM, interesting firm. There's a lot of people who hate their guts, but they're an interesting firm. I don't know if you're into the, what is it, GMO and all that, you know, and all this stuff going on, but it's interesting. I had a student do a paper on Monsanto. You can't do that anymore because they were bought out by Bayer. I think Bayer wishes they never bought them, but Monsanto, they're the ones, you know, with the weed killer that's causing all this cancer. But that was before all of that. Monsanto, people just hated that company, and her paper was showing that she thought they were just being beat up for the wrong reasons. She thought it was a really great company. So it's interesting. UPS, FedEx work well. What's going on with UPS and FedEx now that Amazon Prime has their own delivery? Walmart is starting to talk about home delivery. What are they going to do? Is Walmart going to start buying their own trucks? You're seeing some of these firms using freelance, right? That's interesting. So what is that going to do to UPS and FedEx? How are they going to compete in this? What happens if Amazon gets the drone working? Does that put FedEx out of business? Southwest Airlines, TJ Maxx, Ross, there's a lot of these clothing stores that work really, really well. I think Ross is really, really interesting. They've had some incredibly great years. I think they've kind of struggled here recently. I don't know why a company that owns a store called Dress Barn is doing well. That seems like a really insulting name for a dress store, but they seem to know what they're doing. I've never been in a TJ Maxx in my entire life, but it's an interesting firm. So y'all see what I'm talking about here. So what you need to do is, as soon as possible, well, by Saturday evening, or maybe Sunday at noon, I'll give you an official date this Friday, but you need to decide on your company. You can see it's an extremely important decision. If you're having trouble making a decision, y'all can see I've got some familiarity with these companies because I've seen so many of them over time in my own job and from my students. I've been retired for 12 years, so I don't do the research I used to do. I've kind of gotten lazy, but from my students, I'm seeing these companies. So if you're struggling, give me a call in the morning while I'm on my bike, and we can talk through it, and I can give you some ideas. If you want me looking at the Russell 3000, then call me in the afternoon. Tomorrow afternoon, I'll have all kinds of time. I'll be back home. But you need to make this decision, and it needs to be a very carefully thought out decision. All right, because it's going to have a big impact on this semester. All right, so I'm going to stop it there. Thursday night, we're going to definitely be going in detail on paper one and get you ready for that as soon as possible, so you can start doing that research. And that's the other advantage of getting your company decided as soon as possible, so you can start that research. You could start your research before you get the okay from me. There are some of these companies like Target, Costco, TJ Maxx that I know work, and so you could definitely start working on them. Some of these other companies like Newport, I always forget the name of that company, but the gold company, I'm not so sure because of what's going on in South Africa. So some of these I won't know. Some of them I can actually look up. One thing you can do is, if you want to get some sense, you can go to Yahoo Finance or go to Capital IQ and bring in the financials in your company. Make sure their net worth is positive almost every year. All right, firms have a negative net worth. It really messes up paper three. Also, make sure they don't have just a horrendously bad net income for multiple years. You've got a company that's lost money 4 out of the last 10 years. It's probably not going to work very, very well. So try to find a firm. You can have a loss 1 year, and obviously with COVID-19, but try not to have a company that loses money 4 or 5 years out of 10. That's probably not going to be good. Try to find a firm. You can tell when they have a major merger acquisition, their revenues go from like 20 billion to 43 billion. Or 20 billion to 30 billion all in 1 year. That's probably a firm that's merged. That's going to cause some issues. So you can check on your own. If you don't know how to use Capital IQ, figure it out, because it's really, really important. I'll cover some of that on Thursday night. So the UTSA library has a lot of resources that you can use, and Capital IQ I'm seeing more and more firms using it. So it's good to learn it before you graduate anyway, not just for this class. And you can very easily, they have a button you can click that says bring all of their financials into Excel. and you can just kind of look for problem areas. Affirm that just something radical happens all in 1 year. If you got 8, 9, 10 good years of data, so maybe something horrible happened 12 years ago, you can probably get away with that one and not worry about it, or even years ago. But you know, we're more than 10 years away from the financial crisis, so that's good. So 2008, 2009 won't be an issue. So you should be okay. All right, so I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna stay on and let y'all talk. I've got a class at 9, so I do have to get off probably about 10 or no, well, 10 minutes before then at least. All right, so I'll turn it over to y'all. Any questions y'all have?
Sure, quick question. On to determine what company we go, how do we submit or communicate with you that?
Just reply to that email I sent y'all, and I'll get it. Yeah, just your name. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, if you know someone in the class and you're doing similar companies or the same company, just make sure it's independent work. One thing I strongly recommend, some students, really good students, will another student in the class will say, hey, can you just send me what you sent? I'm just kind of curious. And a student wants to help them out and they'll send it. I had a student do that, and that student took their paper and submitted their paper. And that seems almost, and I knew which one was the original paper, and so I kind of let him get away with it. But don't do that. Don't send your paper to somebody else. All right. You just don't know what your fellow students would do under stress. All right. So you can definitely talk about it, talk ideas. If you find a great article, let's say 2 of you are doing Nike, you find a great article, you can send that person the Nike article. That's perfectly fine. But you need to do your own independent work. One other thing I forgot to mention, hopefully I'll say this Thursday night as well. One thing that always happens in this class is I get the super sob story 6, 7 weeks in. Professor, my computer crashed. I lost my entire paper. I got to start all over again. Make sure throughout the semester, every time you do 30 minutes, an hour work, email what you have to yourself. So you have that backup somewhere. Don't put it on some drive, you know, flash drive that you're going to leave in the FSC and never see again the rest of your life. So I found that, you know, y'all may have better ways to do it. Put it on Google Docs, email it to yourself, whatever. I wouldn't use the flash drive. That's probably been the #1 problem. Students use a flash drive, they work on it on campus, and then they forget their flash drive, and then it's gone. So if you use a flash drive, email whatever you have to yourself afterwards, okay? I don't think I've ever had a semester where at least one student didn't lose everything. And it's so sad when you do that. That's a lot of work to have to start over again.
So,
everybody's waiting to
Professor,
see if someone's going to ask.
so one more time, the key components when picking an article is one, or a company is 1, that they're profitable, 2, that they're in one sector, really, like not doing too many things. And what else would you recommend?
Try to find most of the years are profitable.
Mm-hmm.
You try to avoid a major merger or acquisition. It's not absolutely necessary, but if you can, it just complicates things on paper 3. Avoid financial services industry. I can usually tell if you've got a company in mind. If you want to email it to me or call me, I can usually tell, but just by jumping in either Capital IQ or Yahoo Finance, I can usually tell pretty quickly if there's going to be a major issue there. There are some great companies that you just don't want to do because it's just going to, you know, this class, it's fun to do these great new companies like Twilio. I think really fascinating companies, but it just doesn't work for this class. Part of this class is learning the process of security analysis, and you don't want to disrupt that because you have a company that's just got some problems. It doesn't mean in real life you can't do those companies, but it's just a challenge.
So GameStop wouldn't be a good company to do?
No, I would not do GameStop. I
I'm
don't know when
just
the last
kidding.
time they made money, but our AMC or any of those.
I'm just kidding.
So Professor, NVIDIA's in the process of acquiring ARM Holdings. How is that going to affect like the process of writing my paper?
Well, if they haven't acquired them yet, it's probably okay unless you think it's imminent. I've had students talk about, so that you're going to be using financials that are probably going to be several months old. So if they acquire someone now, it's not going to be in any of your numbers. And I don't update the numbers for quarterly. I just haven't done that in this class. So part of this class is we are going to be using somewhat old information. And so it's, but I think that's okay. I don't think if you submit this paper to an employer, they're going to say, well, my word, how could you miss this? You know, there's a teaching aspect of this. That means at some point we just got to stop. So remember, you're doing a paper over 3 months that you would normally write in 1 week. And so you almost have to let the, you know, just have to stop things and say, okay, that happened. I'm 70% through this paper. I'm just going to have to assume that didn't happen and finish my paper. So
Yes, sir.
sometimes you have no choice. It's like the person who did NVIDIA and suddenly it's sold off halfway through the semester. He's like, what do I do, professor? Say, stick with what you have, you know, don't change anything. And my paper 3 now completely inconsistent with my paper 7. Well, that's okay. I mean, it's unlikely you're going to put a 50-page paper out there on LinkedIn and the human resources person is going to sit down and read the whole thing word to word and say, oh man, your page 12 really contradicts with page 48. That's not going to happen. They're going to glance through it and say, well, this looks really impressive. So, all right, so I got to get off for this. If you have other questions, definitely feel, I know if some students are leery of calling their professor, but I'm encouraging you, call me. We can talk. Don't stress out. If you're stressing out, you need to call me and I'll walk you back and, you know, keep you from getting too overwhelmed by it.